All right, this is a test of Go Live and how or if chat works. Welcome to live chat. Remember to guard your privacy and abide by our community guidelines, which is wear hats. Okay, always wear a hat. Keeps the sun out of your eyes. So while this one's a test, probably be deleted quick. Um, be interesting to see. So my next video, the real one, is going to be on satellites, more to why they matter and how they look at the planet and why it could matter. But this is a bit of a rant. We're starting to turn on a whole lot of incinerators, trash incinerators. Now, we started turning off a whole lot of trash incinerators a while ago because the emissions from them can be pretty nasty. So nothing in that stack emissions was resolved that I know of, but they're going to be turning them back on. Detroit had one that got turned off because of emissions in the local neighborhood they built it in, which was a low-income neighborhood, so to speak. So no one would notice. So what comes out of the stack of a tower emissions? That's kind of a good question. Because if everything is burnt up hot enough, theoretically, all that comes out of the emission plume are gases and solids as microparticles in that gas. So it's dust. That's the soot. That's those microparticle measurements you hear about, the ppm 2.5s and 5s and 10s and whatever. That's a count of how many of those little particles are floating in the air. So EPA readings of dust particles in the air measured in parts per million, so it's very tiny stuff, and it's measured by size in microns, or parts, let me see how does it work. It's in microns, but you're measuring particles in microns in the part per million, so you'll see again 3 different particle size measurements are the standard. So you'll get like a 5, a 10, a 12, whatever they are. I'd have to go look again. So that's something here in Portland they're talking about. Particulate emissions matter, especially from diesel soot and, you know, major factory emissions, day in and day out stuff. Stagnant air matters, doesn't move the particles and disperse them, let them get away so you get higher concentrations of them. So this was meant to talk about those waste incinerators. So on my trip to Europe, a lot of countries have these incinerators. I noticed the stacks almost immediately because the design of the waste stacks is kind of common. You'll see a lot of them. They'll have one single stall stack with maybe 4 towers or 4 pipes in it. One of the things I worked on was stack emissions for those pipes. So the analyzers that you put up there to measure these components. I was responsible for those analyzers in the chemical industry. I put bids out on particulate and EPA reporting systems for other industries. Looked at the instrumentation, existing instrumentation there, and evaluated it. And they're, to me, simple systems, but they're still complex, and then the rules and the laws behind them are huge. So stack emissions is something we know about. We know very well how to go out and look at it and see what it is. The problem is after you superheat all of this waste, the plastic, the paper, the garbage, the little bits of metal and everything else, you're basically melting, vaporizing everything in there. On the other side of that are particulate scrubbers, and those filters go down to parts per something. And those are all standards and everything else. There's probably air scrubbers. There can be catalytic incinerators. And again, all these are doing is tearing elements down, tearing compounds down into base elements. Remember, you can't destroy anything at this level. All you can do is change it. So if you've got a ton of lead in 10,000 tons of garbage, you're still burning a ton of lead. You're vaporizing it. So did the process recondense that lead further down out of a gas stream or out of the dust stream? Or the third waste stream is the soot that's going to come out of the bottom of the generator. So where does all that go? Where does it get buried? How does it get moved around? What is in that? That is hazardous waste. They know that. They're finding that out kind of the hard way with some of the waste storage that they've got, unlined pits. But even with a lined pit, you've still got tons of hazardous materials sitting there waiting for a reason to escape and leach into groundwater. So storage of this stuff has not been well thought out. Back to that stack emission. So now all of these elements are sitting there in an unbound state after the incinerators are done with them. After the scrubbers are done and removed all the large stuff that it can, there's still molecules, there's still elements unbound. They're looking for something to do. They don't like being unstable. They like being bound with things and finding pairs. They're all gay. Let's call them gay because they'll go mate with anything they can and hang around. So those recombine after all of these processes. It can't be helped. It is a chemical fact of recombinant chemistry. Those things are going to bind back together. So one of the emissions that occurs out of those stacks, if a lot of plastics are being burnt, which is a good portion of the waste stream, is going to be dioxins, I believe. It's not dioxins. It's another element. So someone in the chat can jump in, give me a hint. What is the compound? It is a dioxin-like thing. So the big question here is, who knows what's coming out of those stacks? In what quantity? You see the stacks are tall. They're designed to disperse whatever's in them so you don't get high concentrations of whatever's in them. That's how they work. Those are very large systems, very intricate systems. Process controls are way cool on those things. The amount of scrubbing they do to remove these particulates is good and huge and needs to be done better. But the recombinant gases that are happening, the chemical reactions that happen after these gases start to cool in that waste stack, or right after they come out of that stack, they're going to find an oxygen molecule to bind with. So all of that stuff is there, and all of it does something. This is a plume map. The fallout map. These are the residuals that you go test for year after year in the local soils by watching the fallout patterns and the common flows of the stack emissions. So hey, good morning, Environmental Coffee House. I'm glad you joined. I'm trying to figure out what this YouTube thing is. I was playing with a live chat. So yes, welcome to the real world. So what I was just discussing is stack emissions. These are plume emissions. How do we look at them? What I call a Gaussian plume model is typically what you see, but it can be labeled a whole bunch of other things in geology and in mapping. So these things are a matter of the sciences and how they're used. They're very specific to how they're applied and the equations inside of them. One way you can think of a plume map is by altitudes. So the first layer of deposition might be 0, the ground, up to 10 feet above the ground, or 100 feet. And then higher up, the winds are going to take that materials in a different direction, let it settle somewhere else. So here in Portland, what we discovered was what people discovered, what I was waiting to be informed about because we do this, and the USGS came and took local samples from the soils and found that a glass maker here was tossing out a lot of heavy metals. the irony in it is this pretty well-off glassmaker knew what he was doing pretty well. And that's kind of frustrating because they have facilities in Europe. EU has some of the toughest environmental standards as a community that there are out there. That's why Brexit came up. It was to break that tie to the EU's sciences that say, hey, nuclear is not good. Germany shouldn't be doing nuclear. Germany figured out they shouldn't be doing nuclear, and that still is a secret study that has never been released having to do with the environment and health. Somewhere in there, Germany saw a long-term net negative return in nuclear power, including the industry making the parts, which is huge. The parts have to be certified and go through processes people don't appreciate. So no, the EU has much stronger community than what we have. Our sense of community is so broken that it's I spent 3 months. I went to the COP21 events, and I went for the science to see what the scientists were doing and poked around at some of the displays. It was interesting to see Europe's version of today is significantly different than our version of today. Basically, the world is flooded with suburbia, and everybody's trying to figure out how to make suburbia work because that's where people want to be. Yeah, it is cool. People need to travel. I can't, somehow you have to just break out and go travel and get out of your comfort zone and see the planet. And out of your comfort zone could be going to the state next door. And if you go to Disney, don't just go to Disney. Go find the local restaurants that maybe get a little bit of Disney traffic, but the local folks eat at. The world is filled with too many people for me. But yeah, that's suburbia. But suburbia in Europe is much more structured. In suburbia in Europe, even if it's an apartment high-rise, it still has a living, working community around it. There's almost always a grocery store within walking distance, and the people there are paid fairly well and can make a living and live half decent off of that. And they don't have to worry about their job and their health care and their kids' health care. It is just a more comfortable existence. So the French have the most passion. I spent couch surfing in France for almost 3 weeks during the COP21 event. And I wandered the streets. I didn't have the money for cigarettes, so that's how I went. Yeah. I lived in Pennsylvania, so going to see the Amish in their horse and buggies was a great idea, but somebody still got to shovel the poo. And horses to me are an invasive species, but I love them too. Well. So recombinant chemistry and exhaust stack emissions. It is very hard to understand because you're in that from the process outflow up that stack, which is, I don't know, 40 stories tall, however tall they are. And there could be some magic even going on in that stack. I love horse poop. I live down the street from an old dairy farm, very old dairy farm. And so we were blessed with the smell of fresh cow poo in the morning when it was being spread and for days afterwards. But you can't complain because they were there long before us. So yeah, it's funny watching the parades and stuff. This small town we lived in had lots of farmers' parades and farm shows, and very old farming community. Pennsylvania had a lot of them as well. So that was the first state, Michigan. Michigan has a very sordid history of chemical pollution. It's hidden back there. It's old Dow Chemical stuff that when they went bankrupt because of Bhopal. They didn't go bankrupt, they just got renamed and hidden. Everything got sold off to other companies. So now DuPont's probably the biggest name polluter up in the area. Midland facilities. Now, when I thought of Midland, I used to think of Midland, Texas, which is a whole nother story because I worked down there as well. But yeah, there's a lot going on out there in the world. It's a busy place. So what brought this up was big articles and very little news about those incinerators being turned back on in America. And we don't talk about the reasons that those incinerators were either slowed way down because of their emissions threats, or they were even shut off or mothballed because we found excuses to say they were too costly. And they are too costly if you have to put the required emissions onto them. It may be, and we don't know. So, yeah, yep, big world, huge world. Getting out there to see it's not cheap. But I recommend it to everybody. In Europe, it was amazing to see how many, I took the trains most everywhere I could. The trains compete with airfare, but you're going to spend a day or two on a train versus half a day in an airport and on the plane. So you just save a lot of time by flying. On the other hand, you don't get to see the country. So the train system there is amazing. And you have to think of the EU as a struggling America, and each one is a state because that's about the size of them. And they're just trying to get their shit together and work together and learn from each other. And Brexit and those EU unions and guilds and communities and yellow jackets are like nothing America has ever seen. The closest thing we've seen to that sense of community was Occupy and all the kids out during Occupy. And Bernie's reviving a lot of that and bringing a lot of that back. And I don't know if Bernie will win. Oh, I got PA stories too. You pick a state, I can give you a story about it. PA was long ago mined out. When I worked in New Jersey, I met more people, in the hundreds of people that their parents had worked in Pennsylvania, and General Motors had hired most of the kids from Pennsylvania. These were kids of miners that parents had seen some of the most backbreaking work in coal mines, and they got jobs and moved to New Jersey in these GM plants. And this is wartime stuff. It all has to do with building airplanes and stuff. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I said it's not a small world. So I can speak to professionally because I traveled. I traveled like a dog for years. I moved a family around chasing a bit of a paycheck and had a very rewarding professional career. I had opportunities to see every state cars are made in. I've been to for weeks and months at a time over some decades. So yeah. So Pennsylvania was mined out. So what Pennsylvania does have is a lot of empty mines. And one of the things that was useful is holes in the ground are good for getting stuff thrown in them. And one of the things that happened in Pennsylvania was a lot of those mine shafts became dumping grounds for waste. You can go find the stories and the history about it, but lead was one of the big ones. And we used to use lead. GM bought lead by the tons, week in and week out at their assembly plants when we used to use lead to make the metal look good. You slathered it on like you see people putting mud on the walls of houses now. So very dangerous, lots of lead issues. We got away from that, took a long time. So lots of lead. But what happened to that lead was batteries, tons and tons of batteries for years and years were thrown down into these pits, these old coal mines. And over the decades, the lead leached into the soil, or the battery acids from these things and the leads leached into the soils, and those, you just created an in situ leach mine, which is how you take minerals out of soils if you don't want to do it send people down there and dig it out. So those released all types of minerals from the rocks around and started contaminating groundwaters in the area. So yeah, yep, that was a big problem in Pennsylvania. And they never did do the testing that maybe should be done. The people with wells aren't having the testing done that maybe should be done, or I hope they are. You can get them done, they're not expensive, but and people don't know. When I moved to an area, I went to the EPA list of hazardous waste sites. And also, because there's a lot of places you have to look, I went to, who is it? If the EPA doesn't do the waste site, then Fuse Wrap, which is all covered under the Army Corps of Engineers, does waste management like this. So one of the two of them, or Department of Defense, Department of Energy, they've all got military bases. So if I have actually looked at 3 states I moved to, I looked at these things to see what was going on around in the area, just to get an idea. You know, when you have a family, you try to think a little more about these, and I knew about the risks. So yeah, there's a little Pennsylvania story on polluted drinking water and contaminated wells from lead dumped into empty coal mines from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So, but we learned, and that's one of the reasons the EPA was formed. So, yeah. So the incinerators that I originally started to talk about were just interesting points because I followed the fluidized bed technology that they were trying to use in the incinerators, because it's even related to all fluidized beds like coal plants. Every plant that processes this stuff has kind of the same rules surrounding it. You've got a solids output waste stream, you've got a liquids waste stream, and you've got a gas stream. And they're 3 different areas. And if you get an process upset, that raging fire down in Texas, I turned down a job after my nuclear plant experience to go back down and work at that facility for really good money. And it was doing, it would have been doing probably 4 years of as-built drawing verifications to make sure that upgrades being planned could be done the right way. Yeah, oh yeah, Pasadena, Texas. I've been to Gillies, Mickey Gillies. I've been to Gillies in Pasadena, Texas when it was Gillies. And if you didn't know to put the visor down on your car, you got a bumper sticker put on your car in the parking lot. So, no, I don't line dance or square dance. I just went to saw it to see what it was like, because it was on the way home from work. So yeah, Deer Park, Texas. I lived down in Texas for 4 years. That's kind of where I started my professional career. I worked in non-destructive test equipment in the oil industry, which was drill pipe, downhole pipe. Nice. Yeah, Texas. Man, beautiful state. Really good people. Really redneck. I mean, it's easy to find friends. I'm an ex-Marine, so you can go make all kinds of friends depending on where you want to go to find them. And working in the oil field, you meet interesting folks. So there's just a lot of damn good people out there in spite of their beliefs. So yeah, I've done. Yeah, but when you talk to them, it's not Republican-y. It's a pride in something that is just bigger than them, but smaller than they think it is, maybe. So I get the guns. I know how to use them. If I need a gun, someone's going to have one. You can find one. But that insecurity, I'm rather ashamed at all the insecurities I see out there. I have my own. I'm guilty of it, but yeah. Too much of that. Have a little confidence in yourself. We're old. As far as I can tell, we've been around here about 20 million years, drawing on cave walls and shit, and we're still learning. if the planet's running, what, I don't know how many, 6 billion years old, we got a lot to catch up with. We were dead a lot longer than we're alive, so pretty brutal sounding. So I guess that was I had a privilege of seeing a whole lot of the country because I would fly into whatever plant in whatever state, and most of these plants employed 3,000 to 5,000 people almost directly. They employed 10,000 people indirectly. Um, I started my career in the auto industry putting robot automation cells in. So when I went into a plant, I brought in automation and robots, and typically my 8 robots replaced maybe 4 operators on a line doing welding on a car. So every equipment set, I came in with 100 robots that are coming into a plant and did the interface automation, interlocking control cells. Oh yeah, yeah. I hurt my back a lot. I rode dirt bikes, and I loved motocross and everything else. But I have friends that were killed when I was young, kind of brutally on the road. So it just never excited me. There's too much of a chance. So yeah, yeah. My last dirt bike was an RM 250, and I used to ride with a buddy. Had a Yankee 400 out in the desert. That was a long time ago. I've been on bikes since, but when I get on something, I tend to try to break it, or I break, so I kind of left the excitement to the kids long ago. But I'll do it again. I'm that dumb. I heal still, so what the heck. So yeah, it concerns me. The environment is huge. I saw the oil industry and fracking. Actually, this was pre-fracking times. I traveled all across Oklahoma. I got to visit open pit mines servicing lab instruments that tested for elements, and lots of labs and facilities all across the Southwest. Uh, I hadn't started international travel doing the lab equipment, but that was just next. I was just building up experience. So now I would argue that fracking was necessary. It's just whether it's being done right or not, or being done well. And we know how to do things a hell of a lot better than what people want you to believe. So the oil industry has its own sordid stories, and a lot of that is in these subcontracting rules. So when the BLM sells off leases, they don't give a shit who they sell it to. Yeah, yeah. This is a devil's choice. There used to be in conversation this thing called, and it's still there, it exists. It's called the national reserves or national energy stockpiles. And it's not just energy, it is what we need to run and build and keep our military going and well beyond. This states' right bullshit is such bullshit you can't believe. For World War I and II, the crystals that made the radio systems and all this high-tech stuff that we use actually came from a South American country, because they had mines with the ultra-high purity crystals that had grown over millions and millions of years in the planet with no one there. It's just how mineralization worked and formed those silica structures. So yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Well, if we didn't have the BLM, what is the option? How else would we give that to the churches to manage? Would we give that to corporations to manage? These structures were set up for reasons, like the EPA, and have just been so subjugated by shallow, young earth believers. And I'm not going to make excuses for this. That shit makes you dumb. You can't understand pollution, our planet, if you have a young earth mindset, or if you think that we haven't evolved to get this far. Listen, I'm a Marine. I took an oath to the Constitution, and I value that beyond military service. It is, this training came from air command schools I got while in the Marine Corps. That was the second set of training. The Air Force taught me how we measure everything that we can speak to. I understand why 12 inches is 12 inches, although people laugh at me when I say 12 inches. So, yeah. Yep, it's a big world, beautiful world. So, hey, thank you for joining. It's interesting to see the view count on this. I tried for years in Facebook to get some traction, and people, want bombastic talk. This is the future that some folks are planning for. We need to have the oil and the gas, and the kids need to be able to go to a state park and discover a scorpion under a rock and hopefully not get bit. And then go visit some family in Europe they never knew they had, or some family in South America or Asia they never knew they had, and eat their nasty ass food and get sick. So yeah. And Europe offers this so much better, because going from one state to the next here is going to a minor language change and a little cultural shift. Going from one state there is going to almost a totally different society. You're forced into a different culture, and they don't mind as long as you're not an asshole. I don't know how we stop drilling right now, because we need energy. If you go back into particle physics, almost everything is defined as energy, and energy becomes mass somehow. Now, that is nuclear theory stuff, and maybe a better specific more chat, because I think we need to know what the hell we're doing. And this short-term profit, what's happening is we aren't doing it right, and we're going to pay for it in the short term. And the people that are extracting the profits, the Koch industries, the DuPont families, the Dows, those things people call the Illuminati, that are actual corporations that are trying to guide their own future. There's a distinct difference between short-term profits and this 20% return. That's a thermal block. We have them on a lot of the windows just because they're old, cheap windows, and it kind of helps save some energy costs. The list of things to do here is always something to do. No, it doesn't look. It looks like crap. I try to pick a different background, but that's not why I'm here. I mean, the bullshit behind me gives. Look at the haircut. I did this myself because I'm too lazy to go to a barber, but I will someday. And now I'm letting the beard go because I don't know if I want a beard again or not. But hey. Yeah, and that's all you can do. I mean, the only thing you as an individual, the best thing we can do is recycle and reuse. And like I buy used cars now because if a car doesn't have 200,000 miles on it, it shouldn't be thrown away, you know? There's somebody that needs a half-decent car much more, you know? So reusing that car instead of sending it to recycling, it means that you didn't suck another 10 gallons of oil out of the ground to make the plastic. And it's a lot more than 10 gallons now. You didn't suck another 1,000 gallons of oil out of the ground to harvest the raw materials for the windshield and the metals, because we're still, you know, we're consumers. We eat what we can. We eat what we have to. And you know we will. If you've been anywhere near survival stuff in the service, I mean, you learn bugs are tasty when you're hungry. And we'll eat bugs. Oh, I love VWs. And I grew up, my mom had the first VW she bought with her own hard-earned money in middle-class suburbia. And it was a sand-colored VW. Yeah, yeah. Yep, I love it. And they're easy. And if you've got what's the J.C. Whitney catalog, you could build a VW without buying one. So yeah, they're fun and easy to work on, pretty simple. But if you're one of them pollutioner people, they're not the greatest things. Now convert it to electric. I mean, that's my dream, would be converted to electric. So I don't know how to get around the fracking now, but it's like the nuclear industry. You can't just turn this stuff off. Even if you turn it off, you still have decades. You have a 40 or 50 decade cycle, cleanup cycle, to mothball that plant. Yeah, yeah. I was never big on Barbara, and I don't like her politics at all. She got hers, but hey, good singer though. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm not big on heroes, but I do understand art. So yeah, I mean, the singing, yeah. So here in Oregon, the only incinerator I'm aware of is between here and Salem. And it's oddly located way out in the country. So people that might even have stack emissions probably are going to go to their local church and ask God about that. And I don't, you know, I hope he answers them. Oh, we have the rest of our lives. That's the challenge here. That is you know. I mean, the dinosaurs didn't have much of a say in any of it, but some of them survived. But to invest in a short-term survival is pretty weak. I mean, I've been there. I've had, you know, 3 months of food on supply. I've had the water purifiers and the backup generator and some level of hardening. You know, so from when I had the family, I did what I thought was necessary and I got it. But after a while, you realize maybe that money was better spent on a politician. So that, I don't know. I don't have an answer. But I know we had well water. And even if I did get it tested, I knew what was probably going to be in it. So it passed normal drinking water tests, but it should have been above and beyond that testing, which costs money. It's not the off-the-shelf test from the grocery store that you can get, or the hardware store. So rather than doing the testing and trying to go complain about it because I knew it wouldn't go anywhere and it was my own well, no city water choice, I spent the money on what was at the time one of the best types of filter systems that you can get. But even that's a consumer filter, and knowing what I know, I would have spent another $20,000 if I was serious about it on a filter system that would take out more, because even a reverse osmosis isn't what you need. So yeah, yeah, that's right. I had well water. I had 4 acres, and it was out in the middle of hundreds of acres of farmland. So I was pretty well guaranteed But then, when they planted soybeans and sprayed, and those farmlands had been there, my house was one of the first farmhouses in Michigan. Very, very old, but it was a working farmhouse. It never grew into a huge homestead. It died. And they raised cattle. So it had its own story behind it and could have been one of those heritage houses. So yeah, we had a pig outside, and the pig, if you stretched it, propane pig, I could go maybe 3 to 5 months, because the wood stove would heat the house, but just 2 rooms of the house. And we had 20-degree below winters. There's no way the wood stove. So then you run into reasons to try to heat the house. So you get into load leveling, and so I had, like I said, I could go 3 months in an absolute disaster, but then at the end of 3 months, what have you got to look forward to? So it didn't make too much sense. So yeah, pick another state. Yeah, the challenge is the electric. You have to be able to power the blowers to move air around for any type of furnace system to be efficient, or even to be able to run a ceiling fan is nice. And if you wanted to get fancy, you could make a steam-powered ceiling fan off your stove, right? But doesn't help you in the summertime. So yeah, there's all kinds of ways around it. New York, beautiful state. Love New York. People think of New York City, which is, its own beauty. It's the beauty of a city. Yeah, here in Oregon, it's a huge mix because the Columbia Generating Station's upstream from us. And I know they've been building gas stations. What we're fighting here now is huge energy transport facilities, because they want to ship natural gas and whatever else they can do over to Asia from here. So up and down the coast are battles for these huge supertanker terminals. And the pipelines feeding them. So it's tough to get the environmental movement kind of moving in one direction. I speak to faith as being a problem, and that right away rules out a good bit of audience. And I don't speak against, beliefs. I get there's something bigger than us out there. And I don't know what it is, but it certainly isn't here now. Or if it is, it needs to present a little bit better than it is. Eugene's nice. KVRM in Eugene, way cool. I'll have to see if I can get it from here. I doubt it. I'll probably find it on the internet out there somewhere. Yeah, Eugene's an interesting town, very much a college town. I lived down in Salem for some years working on Medicare and Medicaid software systems that run, well, they used to. So that unit I worked for with HP was sold out to a company called CSC. And that was HP's IT sourcing arm. And we did computer stuff. Yeah, it's nice over here. The coast, what's amazing about here is I've lived in every state, or visited every state but Hawaii. And this is just the most interesting. Almost any time of year you can drive a couple hours and go to snow up in the mountains, or drive a couple hours and get to the beach. And you can almost always see snow peak caps, especially on clear days. There's 3 or 4, Mount Rainier, Mount Hood. What's the one that... so yeah, just a beautiful, beautiful place. So yeah, if you're heading out this way, I don't get down to Eugene much, but no idea where I'll be month to month. Yeah, the environment is creepy stuff. What's going on in St. Louis is nothing new. Most of that, although they're talking about the gases because that's the stuff they can smell. Again, that's about underwater ground flow. And because it's topsoil, you're talking about top flow, so you've got flow vertical and then horizontal. And it's been like that for decades. Whatever else is being dissolved in those fires and disassociated in those fires, if the rain and the water's not kept off of it, it's going to perk down through the soil because that's what it does. Well, I'm running out of steam here. I really appreciate you stopping by and talking. Uh, More than happy to do more of these. I'm going to have to go back at this and look. I tend to slow down depending on the topic and where my mind's got to go to retrieve from the bucket of industries I've got to speak about. So yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much. Have a great day.